Today, we explore a principle that has shaped human achievement across history. Everything becomes possible when belief moves beyond thought and turns into action. Belief, in its truest sense, is not wishful thinking or hopeful optimism. It is an inner conviction so deeply accepted that it quietly guides choices, reactions, and decisions. Education often teaches us what to think, but rarely how belief itself operates as a formative force in our lives. Understanding this difference can transform not only what we achieve, but how we experience life itself. Belief is often misunderstood as a quiet, inactive mental state, something that exists only in thought without real consequence. In reality, belief is one of the most active forces shaping human behavior, perception, and experience. It is not simply what we say we believe, but what we inwardly accept as true. This inner acceptance works continuously, influencing how we interpret events, how we respond to challenges, and how we decide to act. Belief, therefore, is not passive thinking. It is a living inner assumption that operates whether we are aware of it or not. From an educational perspective, it is important to recognize that belief functions as a framework through which information is filtered. Two students may receive the same lesson, the same resources, and the same opportunities, yet achieve different outcomes. The difference often lies not in intelligence or effort alone, but in belief. A student who believes learning is possible approaches difficulty as a temporary obstacle, while one who believes they are incapable perceives the same difficulty as proof of limitation. In this way, belief shapes interpretation before action even begins. Belief also determines attention. The human mind naturally focuses on evidence that supports its assumptions. When an individual holds a belief about themselves or the world, the mind selectively notices experiences that confirm it and often ignores those that contradict it. This process happens unconsciously. For example, someone who believes opportunities are scarce will notice rejection more vividly than acceptance, while someone who believes growth is always possible will notice lessons even in failure. Thus, belief quietly educates perception, teaching the mind what to see and what to overlook. Another important aspect of belief is its relationship with identity. Beliefs are closely tied to how individuals see themselves. Statements such as "I am capable," "I am unlucky," or "I always fail under pressure" are not merely descriptions. They are assumptions that guide behavior. When a belief becomes part of identity, actions automatically align with it. A person who believes they are disciplined does not constantly force themselves to act. Discipline feels natural to them. This demonstrates that belief is not an abstract idea, but an organizing principle of behavior. Belief also influences emotional responses. Emotions are not random reactions to events. They are responses shaped by interpretation. Interpretation, in turn, is shaped by belief. When a challenge arises, belief determines whether it is perceived as a threat or an opportunity. If an individual believes they are capable of learning and adapting, stress may be accompanied by motivation. If they believe they are inadequate, the same situation may produce fear and avoidance. In this way, belief governs emotional energy, which directly affects action. Educational growth requires understanding that belief is reinforced through experience, but experience is also shaped by belief. This creates a self-reinforcing cycle. When someone believes they can succeed, they are more likely to try, persist, and learn from mistakes. These actions increase the likelihood of success, which then strengthens the original belief. Conversely, limiting beliefs discourage effort, reduce persistence, and increase avoidance, leading to outcomes that appear to confirm those beliefs. Breaking this cycle begins with awareness. Belief is also expressed through expectation. What we expect subtly alters how we prepare and respond. An individual who expects success prepares differently than one who expects failure. Preparation affects performance, and performance affects results. This chain reaction illustrates how belief, though invisible, produces tangible consequences. In educational settings, expectations held by learners often determine how deeply they engage with material, how confidently they ask questions, and how persistently they practice skills. Importantly, belief does not operate only at the conscious level. Many beliefs are formed early through repeated messages, experiences, and observations. Over time, they become assumptions rather than deliberate thoughts. Because they feel familiar, they are rarely questioned. However, familiarity does not equal truth. Education that encourages critical thinking must extend inward, teaching individuals to examine not only external information, but also internal assumptions. This inward examination is essential for growth. Belief gains strength through repetition and emotional reinforcement. When an idea is repeated with feeling, it gradually moves from possibility to assumption. This is why self-talk, inner dialogue, and habitual thinking patterns are so influential. What we repeatedly affirm internally becomes the lens through which we act. Changing belief, therefore, is not a single moment of decision, but a process of consistent inner alignment. It is also important to understand that belief alone does not replace effort or learning. Rather, belief determines the quality and direction of effort. A strong belief does not eliminate challenges, it changes the response to them. Instead of discouragement, there is curiosity. Instead of avoidance, there is engagement. Action becomes purposeful rather than forced. In this way, belief acts as the foundation upon which skill, knowledge, and discipline are built. In conclusion, belief is an active inner force that shapes perception, emotion, identity, and action. It is constantly educating the mind, guiding attention, and influencing decisions. Recognizing belief as an active process rather than passive thinking empowers individuals to take responsibility for their inner assumptions. When belief is consciously direct, it becomes a powerful ally in learning, growth, and achievement. Everything that follows, effort, persistence, and success, naturally flows from this inner foundation. Imagination is often reduced to the idea of fantasy, something separate from logic or practical life. In an educational sense, this misunderstanding limits one of the most powerful faculties of the human mind. Imagination is not an escape from reality. It is a formative process through which reality is first shaped. Every invention, discovery, or personal achievement begins as an imagined possibility before it takes physical form. When imagination is consistently and deliberately directed, it becomes a structured inner activity that influences behavior, decision-making, and outcomes. At its core, imagination allows the mind to experience events before they occur. This inner experience is not neutral. The brain responds to imagined scenarios in ways similar to real ones, especially when emotion is involved. When a learner imagines success, understanding, or mastery with clarity and feeling, the mind rehearses those states. This rehearsal conditions responses, builds familiarity, and reduces uncertainty. In this way, imagination acts as a preparatory classroom within the mind, where experiences are practiced before they are expressed in action. Education traditionally emphasizes external repetition, practice problems, drills, and exercises. While these are important, imagination provides an internal form of repetition that is equally influential. When an idea is repeatedly imagined, it gains psychological weight. The mind begins to treat it as probable rather than distant. This shift in probability perception alters motivation. What once felt uncertain starts to feel attainable, and what feels attainable invites action. Thus, imagination subtly shifts the learner from hesitation to engagement. Another key function of imagination is its role in shaping self-concept. How individuals imagine themselves determines how they act. A person who consistently imagines themselves as confident, capable, and improving will unconsciously adopt behaviors aligned with that image. Conversely, imagining oneself as limited or inadequate reinforces avoidance and self-doubt. These imagined identities do not remain abstract. They influence posture, tone of voice, persistence, and willingness to attempt challenges. Imagination, therefore, educates the self-image that guides everyday conduct. Imagination also bridges the gap between knowledge and application. Many individuals know what they should do, but struggle to do it. This gap often exists because the mind has not emotionally experienced the outcome. When imagination is used to vividly experience the process and result of action, the mind becomes more cooperative. For example, a student who imagines the satisfaction of understanding a concept rather than merely the pressure of studying is more likely to engage with the material. The imagined emotional reward energizes real effort. Consistency is crucial in directing imagination. A single imagined scene has limited impact, but repeated focus creates conditioning. Over time, the imagined outcome begins to feel familiar. Familiarity reduces fear and resistance. The mind naturally moves toward what it recognizes. This is why individuals often repeat the same patterns in life, whether constructive or limiting. Those patterns were first rehearsed internally. Education that incorporates conscious imagination teaches learners how to rehearse growth rather than stagnation. Imagination also shapes interpretation of present circumstances. When the mind holds a clear inner picture of improvement or success, temporary setbacks are interpreted differently. They become part of a process rather than signs of failure. This reframing is not denial but contextual understanding. Imagination provides a broader narrative in which current difficulties are seen as transitional stages. This perspective sustains effort and resilience, both essential for learning and development. It's important to distinguish between uncontrolled imagination and disciplined imagination. Uncontrolled imagination often drifts toward worry, fear, and negative anticipation. These imagined scenarios can be just as influential as positive ones, conditioning the mind for avoidance and stress. Disciplined imagination, on the other hand, involves consciously selecting and sustaining images that align with desired outcomes. Education should therefore include training in attention and mental direction, helping individuals recognize that imagination can be guided rather than left to habit. Imagination also influences decision-making. When individuals imagine future consequences with clarity, they make choices that align with long-term goals rather than short-term comfort. This ability to mentally project outcomes is fundamental to responsible action. A learner who imagines the long-term benefits of consistent effort is more likely to act with discipline in the present. In this way, imagination supports self-regulation and delayed gratification, both key elements of effective learning. Another educational value of imagination lies in empathy and understanding. By imagining perspectives beyond one's own, individuals expand cognitive flexibility. This not only improves social learning, but also deepens comprehension of complex ideas. When learners imagine how concepts apply in real-life contexts, abstract knowledge becomes meaningful. Imagination transforms information into lived understanding, making learning more durable and transferable. Imagination does not replace action. It precedes and shapes it. When inner images are aligned with desired growth, action becomes a natural extension rather than a forced effort. The mind moves toward what it has already accepted internally. This is why imagination must be paired with emotional involvement. Emotion gives imagined experiences depth and realism, increasing their influence on behavior. Without emotion, imagination remains superficial. With emotion, it becomes formative. In conclusion, imagination is a creative faculty that influences outcomes when consistently and deliberately directed. It educates perception, shapes self-concept, prepares the mind for action, and sustains motivation. When individuals learn to use imagination consciously, they gain access to an internal tool that supports learning, resilience, and purposeful action. By treating imagination as an active mental discipline rather than idle fantasy, education empowers individuals to move from possibility to achievement through informed and intentional action. Intellectual agreement is often mistaken for true belief. Many people understand ideas logically, accept them as reasonable, and even repeat them verbally. Yet their behavior remains unchanged. This happens because intellectual acceptance alone does not move the deeper levels of the mind that govern action. True belief is formed when an idea is emotionally accepted, when it is felt as real rather than merely understood. Feeling is not separate from learning. It is the force that gives learning direction and power. From an educational viewpoint, emotion plays a central role in how information is absorbed and retained. Concepts linked with emotion are remembered more clearly and applied more readily than those learned in an emotionally neutral state. When learners feel curiosity, confidence, or interest, their engagement deepens. In contrast, when learning is associated with anxiety or self-doubt, comprehension and application suffer. This illustrates that emotional states are not side effects of learning, but core components of it. Emotional acceptance transforms an idea into an assumption. An assumption is not questioned repeatedly, it is taken as given. When an idea reaches this level, behavior adjusts automatically. For example, a person who feels capable does not need constant motivation to try. Trying feels natural. On the other hand, someone who feels inadequate may understand logically that effort leads to improvement, yet still avoid challenges. The difference lies in what is emotionally accepted, not what is intellectually known. Feeling also determines the quality of attention. When an idea resonates emotionally, attention naturally returns to it. The mind revisits it without effort, strengthening familiarity. This repeated emotional focus conditions the nervous system to respond in alignment with the idea. Over time, reactions shift. Situations that once triggered fear may begin to trigger curiosity or determination. This gradual shift illustrates how emotional acceptance reshapes responses without conscious struggle. Education often emphasizes control of behavior while overlooking regulation of emotional states. However, behavior follows emotion more reliably than rules or instructions. A learner who feels safe and capable will explore, ask questions, and persist. A learner who feels judged or inadequate will withdraw, even if they understand the material. Thus, cultivating emotional acceptance of growth and capability is essential for meaningful education. Emotional acceptance also bridges the gap between intention and consistency. Many individuals set goals with enthusiasm but fail to sustain effort. This inconsistency often arises because the goal is intellectually appealing but emotionally distant. When the emotional state associated with success, familiar and accepted, persistence increases. The mind prefers familiar emotional territory. By repeatedly feeling the state associated with achievement, individuals reduce internal resistance to the actions required to reach it. Another important aspect is the role of emotion in self-talk. Inner dialogue is charged with feeling, and it reinforces beliefs continuously. Statements repeated with emotional intensity become internal truths. If inner dialogue is dominated by frustration or self-criticism, those emotions strengthen limiting beliefs. Conversely, when constructive ideas are repeated with calm confidence, emotional acceptance grows. Education in self-awareness helps individuals recognize and redirect this inner dialogue toward supportive emotional patterns. Emotional acceptance also influences how feedback is received. When individuals emotionally accept the idea that they can improve, feedback is perceived as information rather than judgment. This perception encourages learning and adaptation. Without emotional acceptance, feedback may trigger defensiveness or discouragement, blocking growth. Thus, the emotional context in which learning occurs determines whether information becomes fuel for improvement or a source of resistance. It is important to clarify that emotional acceptance does not mean forcing positive feelings or denying difficulty. Authentic emotional acceptance develops gradually through repeated exposure to constructive inner experiences. It involves allowing the feeling of capability, calm, or confidence to become familiar. Over time, this familiarity reshapes the baseline emotional state from which actions arise. This process is educational in the deepest sense, as it trains the emotional system to support learning rather than hinder it. Emotion also affects decision-making speed and clarity. When an idea is emotionally accepted, decisions are related to it, feel obvious. There is less internal debate and hesitation. This clarity conserves mental energy, allowing focus to shift from doubt to execution. In learning environments, this means students who emotionally accept their ability to understand material engage more fluidly, without excessive self-questioning. The relationship between emotion and belief is cyclical. Beliefs shape emotional responses, and emotional responses reinforce beliefs. By consciously cultivating emotional acceptance of constructive ideas, individuals can interrupt limiting cycles. This does not require dramatic change. Small, consistent shifts in emotional focus gradually accumulate. Over time, these shifts redefine what feels normal, and what feels normal determines how one acts. In conclusion, emotional acceptance is more powerful than intellectual agreement because it converts ideas into lived assumptions. Feeling is the medium through which belief becomes active and behavior becomes aligned. Education that acknowledges and integrates emotion equips individuals with the ability to transform understanding into action. When ideas are not only understood but felt, they move from theory into practice, shaping consistent behavior and meaningful results. The human mind learns through repetition. This principle is well established in education, skill development, and habit formation. What is less commonly recognized is that repetition does not apply only to physical actions or spoken information, but also to inner focus. The thoughts we return to, the images we revisit, and the ideas we quietly assume shape mental patterns over time. Repeated inner focus conditions the mind just as repeated external practice conditions the body, and this conditioning plays a decisive role in how belief turns into action. Inner focus refers to the direction of attention toward particular ideas, expectatio, or interpretations. Attention is not neutral. Whatever it rests upon gains influence. When an idea is repeatedly held in awareness, the mind begins to treat it as significant. Significance leads to familiarity, and familiarity leads to acceptance. This is why ideas that are frequently revisited, even casually, can gradually feel true. From an educational standpoint, this explains why exposure alone can shape attitudes and expectations even without conscious agreement. Repetition strengthens neural pathways. Each time an idea is mentally rehearsed, the brain reinforces the connections associated with it. Over time, these pathways become more efficient, making the idea easier to recall and more likely to influence decisions. This biological process underlies habits of thought. When constructive ideas are repeatedly focused on, the mind becomes conditioned to respond constructively. When limiting ideas are repeatedly entertained, the mind becomes conditioned toward doubt or avoidance. Understanding this mechanism empowers individuals to choose what they mentally rehearse. Repeated inner focus also reduces resistance. New ideas often encounter internal opposition because they feel unfamiliar. The mind tends to prefer what it already knows, even if it is unhelpful. However, repetition transforms the unfamiliar into the familiar. When an individual repeatedly focuses on an idea of capability, improvement, or success, that idea gradually loses its sense of novelty and threat. As resistance fades, action becomes easier. This is why consistency in inner focus is more effective than intensity. Another important function of repeated inner focus is its influence on automatic responses. Much of human behavior is automatic rather than deliberate. These automatic responses are shaped by prior conditioning. When certain interpretations are repeatedly reinforced, they become default reactions. For example, if someone repeatedly focuses on seeing challenges as opportunities to learn, that interpretation eventually becomes automatic. In stressful situations, the mind responds with problem solving rather than panic. This illustrates how inner repetition educates the subconscious level of behavior. Inner focus also shapes expectations, which in turn influence performance. When the mind repeatedly anticipates positive outcomes, it prepares the individual to act in ways that support those outcomes. This preparation may appear as confidence, persistence, or creative problem solving. Conversely, repeated focus on negative expectations prepares the mind for failure, often resulting in hesitation or self-sabotage. The educational value here lies in recognizing expectation as a product of repeated attention rather than fixed reality. Consistency in inner focus creates coherence between thought and action. When thoughts are scattered or contradictory, action becomes inconsistent. Repeated focus on a clear, constructive idea aligns mental energy. This alignment reduces internal conflict, allowing action to flow more smoothly. In learning environments, this coherence supports sustained effort. Students who consistently focus on understanding and progress experience fewer emotional fluctuations and greater stability in their engagement. Repeated inner focus also affects emotional regulation. Emotions are influenced by the meaning we assign to events, and meaning is shaped by repeated interpretations. By consistently focusing on calm, constructive interpretations, individuals can gradually shift their emotional baseline. This does not eliminate emotional responses, but moderates their intensity and duration. Education that includes training in attention helps learners develop emotional resilience alongside cognitive skills. Another critical aspect is the role of inner focus in self-identity. Repeated thoughts about oneself accumulate into self-beliefs. Statements such as I am learning, I am improving, or I can adapt gain strength through repetition. Over time, these ideas become part of identity, guiding behavior without conscious effort. Identity-driven behavior is powerful because it does not rely on constant motivation. It arises naturally from self-perception. It is important to distinguish between passive repetition and intentional focus. Passive repetition occurs when the mind drifts habitually toward familiar patterns, often shaped by past experiences. Intentional focus involves consciously choosing the ideas to be repeated. Education should aim to develop this intentionality, teaching individuals that attention is a skill that can be trained. By practicing intentional focus, learners gain agency over their mental conditioning. Repeated inner focus does not mean ignoring problems or denying reality. Instead, it involves choosing the framework through which reality is approached. Problems still exist, but they are viewed through a lens of learning and adaptability. This perspective encourages engagement rather than avoidance. Over time, this engagement leads to competence, which further reinforces constructive beliefs. In conclusion, repeated inner focus conditions the mind to act in harmony with assumed outcomes. Through repetition, ideas gain familiarity. Familiarity leads to acceptance, and acceptance guides action. By understanding and applying this principle, individuals can educate their minds toward consistency, resilience, and purposeful behavior. Inner focus, when practiced deliberately, becomes a quiet but powerful force that aligns belief with action and transforms potential into sustained achievement. Action is often viewed as something that must be forced through discipline, willpower, or external pressure. While these elements can produce short-term results, they rarely lead to sustained growth. Genuine, consistent action arises most naturally when belief is aligned with the desired outcome. When inner conviction is established, action no longer feels like a struggle. It becomes an expression of what feels true. This principle highlights an important educational insight. Behavior is not the starting point of change, but its visible result. When belief is aligned, effort takes on a different quality. Instead of being driven by fear of failure or external reward, action is guided by internal coherence. A person who truly believes in their capacity to learn does not need constant reminders to practice. Practice feels meaningful rather than burdensome. This alignment reduces resistance, which is often the hidden reason behind procrastination and inconsistency. Resistance emerges when actions contradict internal assumptions. Alignment dissolves that conflict. Aligned action is characterized by clarity. When belief and intention are in harmony, decisions become simpler. There is less internal debate about whether to act, how to act, or when to act. The mind conserves energy that would otherwise be spent on doubt. In educational settings, this clarity allows learners to focus on understanding and application rather than self-questioning. Clarity supports momentum, and momentum supports mastery. Another important feature of aligned action is adaptability. When belief is rooted in growth rather than rigid outcomes, action becomes flexible. Individuals are more willing to adjust strategies, learn from feedback, and refine their approach. This adaptability is essential for real-world learning, where progress is rarely linear. Belief aligned with learning encourages experimentation rather than perfectionism, reducing fear of mistakes. Aligned action also influences persistence. Persistence is often misunderstood as stubborn endurance, but in reality, it is sustained engagement driven by meaning. When belief affirms that effort leads to improvement, setbacks are interpreted as part of the process rather than reasons to stop. This interpretation preserves motivation over time. Educational success, therefore, depends less on intensity of effort and more on continuity of belief-driven action. There is also a noticeable difference in emotional experience when action is aligned with belief. Forced action often produces stress, tension, and fatigue. Aligned action, while still requiring effort, feels purposeful and energizing. This positive emotional feedback reinforces behavior, making it more likely to continue. Over time, this creates a self-sustaining cycle where belief supports action and action strengthens belief. Aligned action enhances learning efficiency. When actions are guided by belief in understanding rather than fear of evaluation, learners engage more deeply. They ask better questions, seek clarification, and reflect on feedback. This depth of engagement leads to stronger comprehension and retention. Education that fosters belief alignment thus improves not only motivation but also learning outcomes. Another key aspect is responsibility. When action flows from belief, individuals recognize their role in shaping outcomes. This sense of agency encourages proactive behavior. Rather than waiting for external direction, individuals take initiative. In learning environments, this translates to self-directed study, curiosity, and independent problem-solving. Belief in one's ability to influence results is foundational to lifelong learning. Aligned action also impacts consistency. Many people begin projects with enthusiasm, but struggle to maintain effort. This inconsistency often reflects misalignment between belief and behavior. When belief is weak or contradictory, action relies on fluctuating motivation. When belief is strong, action becomes habitual. Habits formed through belief alignment are more resilient because they are supported internally rather than imposed externally. It is important to note that aligned action does not imply constant confidence or absence of doubt. Doubt may still arise, but it does not dominate behavior. Belief provides a stable reference point that guides action despite temporary uncertainty. This stability is especially important in complex learning tasks that require time and repeated effort. Aligned action also fosters integrity between inner and outer life. When actions reflect inner convictions, individuals experience greater satisfaction and authenticity. This integrity reduces internal stress and enhances focus. In educational and professional contexts, authenticity supports ethical behavior and meaningful engagement. Finally, aligned action transforms goals into processes. Instead of fixating on distant results, individuals focus on daily actions that reflect their beliefs. This process-oriented approach sustains motivation and reduces anxiety. Education benefits from this shift, as learning is inherently a process rather than a single outcome. In conclusion, action naturally follows belief when the inner state is aligned with the desired result. Alignment transforms effort into expression, persistence into purpose, and learning into a meaningful journey. By educating belief, first, action becomes sustainable, adaptable, and effective, allowing individuals to move steadily toward growth and achievement without constant struggle. Personal responsibility is often discussed in terms of external duties and moral obligations, but in the context of conscious change, it begins internally. True responsibility starts with self-observation, the ability to notice one's own thoughts, emotional reactions, assumptions, and habitual interpretations without immediate judgment. This inward awareness is not about criticism or blame. It is about understanding cause and effect within one's own experience. When individuals recognize that their inner patterns influence their outer results, responsibility becomes a source of empowerment rather than pressure. Self-observation is an educational skill. Just as learners are taught to observe data, analyze problems, and reflect on outcomes, they must also learn to observe themselves. This includes noticing recurring emotional responses, habitual self-talk, and automatic reactions to challenges. These internal patterns often operate below conscious awareness, yet they quietly shape behavior. By bringing them into awareness, individuals gain the ability to make informed adjustments rather than reacting unconsciously. One of the most important aspects of self-observation is recognizing assumptions. Assumptions are beliefs taken as facts, often formed through past experiences and reinforced through repetition. They influence expectations and decisions without being questioned. When individuals observe these assumptions, they can evaluate whether they support or hinder growth. This evaluation is a key educational process, as it encourages critical thinking applied inwardly. Without self-observation, assumptions remain invisible and continue to shape outcomes unchecked. Personal responsibility also involves acknowledging emotional ownership. Emotions are frequently attributed to external events or other people, yet they arise from interpretation. By observing emotional responses and the meanings assigned to situations, individuals reclaim agency over their inner states. This does not mean suppressing emotion, but understanding its origin. Emotional literacy enables individuals to respond thoughtfully rather than react impulsively, improving both learning and relationships. Self-observation reveals patterns over time. Single reactions may seem insignificant but repeat. D patterns indicate underlying beliefs. For example, consistent avoidance of challenges may reveal a belief about capability. Recognizing such patterns allows individuals to address the root rather than the symptom. This depth of understanding supports sustainable change, as it targets the source of behavior rather than attempting to force different actions. Responsibility also includes choice. Once patterns are observed, individuals can choose how to respond differently. Choice does not imply instant transformation. It involves gradual adjustment. Small, conscious changes in interpretation, self-talk, or emotional response accumulate over time. Education that emphasizes personal responsibility teaches learners that progress is incremental and that consistency is more important than perfection. Another critical element is accountability without self-judgment. Harsh self-criticism often leads to defensiveness or discouragement, blocking growth. Constructive responsibility, by contrast, combines honesty with compassion. It recognizes mistakes as information rather than evidence of failure. This approach encourages continued engagement and learning. When individuals feel safe to observe themselves honestly, they are more likely to grow personal responsibility. It also reshapes the perception of external circumstances. While individuals cannot control every event, they can control their response. Self-observation clarifies the distinction between what can and cannot be influenced. This clarity prevents wasted energy on resentment or blame and redirects focus toward constructive action. In educational contexts, this mindset supports resilience and adaptability. Self-observation enhances intentional belief formation. When individuals are aware of their inner patterns, they can consciously choose which beliefs to reinforce. This intentionality transforms belief from an unconscious inheritance into a deliberate practice. Over time, chosen beliefs become habitual, shaping perception and behavior automatically. Responsibility, in this sense, is the practice of guiding one's inner education. Another benefit of self-observation is improved decision-making. Awareness of emotional and cognitive biases allows individuals to pause before acting. This pause creates space for reasoned choice rather than habitual reaction. In learning environments, this leads to better study strategies, healthier responses to feedback, and more effective collaboration. Personal responsibility also fosters humility and openness. Observing one's own limitations without defensiveness encourages learning from others. This openness is essential for intellectual and personal growth. Responsibility, therefore, is not about control, but about willingness to learn and adapt. Finally, self-observation connects belief to action. By observing how inner states precede behavior, individuals gain insight into the mechanics of change. This understanding reinforces the principle that transformation begins within. Responsibility becomes the bridge between awareness and action, enabling conscious alignment rather than unconscious repetition. In conclusion, personal responsibility and self-observation are essential for conscious change. They empower individuals to understand their inner processes, choose constructive responses, and guide belief intentionally. Through awareness, compassion, and consistent adjustment, responsibility becomes a liberating force that supports learning, growth, and purposeful action. As we conclude, it becomes clear that the true power behind achievement and transformation does not lie in chance, talent alone, or external conditions, but in the inner process that precedes all visible results. Belief is the silent foundation upon which action is built. When belief, F, is understood as an active inner assumption rather than a passive thought, it reshapes perception, emotion, and identity. Imagination prepares the mind for possibility. Emotional acceptance turns ideas into lived truths. And repeated inner focus conditions responses until constructive behavior becomes natural rather than forced. Action in this light is not something to be demanded from the self through pressure or fear. It arises organically when inner alignment is achieved. When belief, feeling, and focus are consistent, action flows with clarity, persistence, and adaptability. Challenges no longer appear as signs of limitation, but as part of a learning process that strengthens understanding and capability. Growth becomes sustainable because it is supported from within. Equally important is the role of personal responsibility and self-observation. By becoming aware of inner patterns, assumptions, and emotional responses, individuals reclaim agency over their development. Responsibility transforms from blame into empowerment, enabling conscious choice and intentional belief formation. Through awareness and consistent inner adjustment, change becomes a disciplined yet compassionate process. Ultimately, everything becomes possible when belief becomes action, not through force, but through alignment. When the inner world is educated with clarity, responsibility, and purpose, the outer world responds accordingly. This understanding offers not only a method for achievement, but a framework for lifelong learning, resilience, and meaningful progress.